Hello, today's Bible study comes from 1 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, the first through the 10th verses. And it reads as follows. For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud, and they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. We should not commit sexual immorality, as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 of them died. We should not test Christ, as some of them did, and were killed by snakes. And do not grumble, as some of them did, and were killed by the destroying angel. Wow. Paul is talking about Israel now and relating some things to them. And he says, moreover, brethren. And when he says it, he says, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers. And Paul is talking about completing what was set before them. And not to. And how dangerous it is not to complete it. Don't give up on it because something gets in the way. So he talks about what happened back with Moses and the Israelites, the Hebrews. And he speaks in regards to, even though they saw things happen, he says, all our fathers, and you can think of all of them, and all the blessings that went from them. And it says right here that were in the Exodus, when they were leaving Egypt. Our fathers passed through the cloud. Now, the cloud was the cloud of Shekinah, and it overshadowed Israel all the way through, from Egypt to the Promised Land. They were being covered, and this cloud covered them during the day, and that was to stop them from getting beat up by that heated sun, and it did it at night too. And it was their visual present reminder of God's glory and his presence with them. He hadn't left them. You can see that back in Exodus chapter 13. He hadn't left them. He was with them. Uh-oh. Now we get into some of these things. All passed through the sea. All were baptized into Moses. They all went through the Red Sea. You went through the Red Sea. You saw what God had done for you. He gets you to the other side and you still can't hold on. They made it over to dry ground. They couldn't hold on. Then, if you notice and remember and read, none of them was touched by the water, but the Egyptians were touched by the water. And this was out of God's love and power for them and his glory. And you could say that they passed through the water, so they were baptized. And that's where that comes from. They were baptized by passing through the water. And so they all identified with Moses because they were going with Moses. But even going through this, passing through the water, there were still some problems. But before we get to this, it tells you they all ate the same spiritual food and all drank the same spiritual drink. God provided these things, the food and the drink. You remember he did some things there, from manna to the quails. He provided. And we get provision. They had what we would call modern day baptism and communion. For they drank of the spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Oh, you mean to tell me even they had the presence of Jesus with them? Yes, they did. He was with them in the wilderness. The rock that followed them, Jesus, and Paul is saying, okay, now you done had this. There was still some problems. Because you see in the next part, Paul says, but with most of them, God was not well pleased. And why? Because all the things that he had done, all the privileges, all the blessings, all the deliverance, they didn't please God. They were not. Most of them, and I almost want to say all of them. Remember, only two of them, two from the adults, Caleb and Joshua, came into the promised land. They were scattered in the wilderness. Their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. They didn't enter the promised land. You remember that? They died in the wilderness. And that was because they didn't accept what God really had for them, so they couldn't receive what God really had for them. With most of them, God was not well pleased. And this is a gut check from Paul. And remember, if you remember all the things that the Corinthians were saying, Paul is talking to them about their liberties. Eating in pagan temples, stumbling, sleeping with mother-in-laws. They were the same thing in the same way. And Paul is warning them, hey, don't do this. Because Israel had these same things. And they perished. And you know what? Some of you might also. So Paul is telling them. And then, now these things became our examples. What he's saying is, you should learn from what happened with Israel. Stop doing the things you're doing. These are warning signs because things happen to them. We should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Stop lusting. Stop giving in to your desires for evil things. And the Corinthians had this problem. They insisted on the meat. And excuse me, we said don't lead others into sin, and this led others into sin. We cannot help lead somebody into sin. We have to pay attention. And do not become idolaters as some were of them. In short, Israel, no matter how much the Lord did, you still made idols. You still made images and you still worshiped them. And Corinthians, you have that now. Don't do this. You'll keep giving yourselves over like they did, and things will happen. And you uppity Corinthians who are so educated, don't get caught using your brain power to make idols and make up things that fit your ways and not his ways. And then Paul goes on and starts speaking about the other things that we shouldn't do. Nor let us commit sexual immorality, as some of them did. Well, they did surrender to sexual morality. And Diana had the prostitutes here, and y'all found that as acceptable. And the the son sleeping with his mother-in-law, you found it as acceptable. This is sexual immorality. Y'all having problems with it. And why are you having problems? Because it is your desire, a selfish desire for you. This isn't about the Lord, it's about you. You are trying to do what pleases you. And we do that. And in one day, 23,000 fell. This is out of the Old Testament. And you can see it tells us about the men of the people that fell that day. More or less doesn't know, but it says that number. And if you look who died in this aftermath with this golden calf, it was bad. But Paul is saying, these are warnings, man. I'm trying to help you. And then he says, now let us, nor let us, meaning don't tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted. And they were destroyed by serpents, nor complained. Remember, God sent the fiery serpents down among the people. They was murmuring and complaining, and poof, they were destroyed by the destroyer. Hey, how could you be complaining when he has delivered you as he did? And these Corinthians were steadily putting their own desires, ahead of God's purpose and glory. And this same problem that you have, the Corinthians, the idols and all that, they had those problems. And the destroyer by the destroyer, because of this warning, now this is a warning. This means you haven't stopped. I'm acknowledging there's something wrong, telling you what it is, but you got to do some work after. But they thought they were good to go. They thought they weren't going to, they were good from being destroyed. Because remember, the Israelites were. And but Paul is standing strong with his warning. And he's saying, if Israel went through it, saw it all, received the blessings, and didn't do it and was destroyed, the same thing can happen to you. And even if you think it's a small issue, if you cause one of his brothers to stumble, it is not a small issue. This is man's selfish ways. Our heart is not focused on the Lord, and that is not the kind of heart the Lord wants. So we have to get it together. Amen.